excuse myself for the Lithuanian audience because I will be talking in English. My idea was just to pay honor to our guests and to make our venue a little bit more international, so to see, more open than it usually is. So, the topic of my discussion is the question of epistemology in art. So I would really like to formulate this theme as a question rather than a statement. So normally if we look at the history of art and the history of the philosophy of art and history of aesthetics, now and again we always meet the same question which emerges again and again about the value of art in gaining any particular knowledge. So sometimes we can read, for example, about Aristotle, but okay, is much more practical-minded philosopher who is also emphasizes the cognitive value of art. So after reading classical sources, mostly late Aristotle, for example, in the Platonic tradition, I found myself wondering whether we really should ask this question in the same way as it is posed in encyclopedias, namely. Because when we're talking about the epistemology as such, so we're having in mind the theory of knowledge, in fact. And it's not the case that when we're talking about the sphere of art, it does not by 100% comply to the rules of epistemology as theory, as such. So my idea was to check these classical sources. I started with later than I went to Aristotle again, and I tried to read carefully those places which are accepted as classical sources for let's say the initial introduction of most important aesthetical notions and terms that were later used in philosophy of art. So if we're talking about Plato, for example, the picture is very, very interesting in itself. So normally we are confronted with two ideas which are in a certain contradiction to itself. On the one hand, Plato is somehow talking that the art itself has not so much of the cognitive value as, for example, other more spiritual activities like, for example, science or the theory of numbers or for example, some sort of spiritual contemplation of ideas. So if we would ask Plato what value does artists perform in society, he would say that, okay, artists, they create a sort of hobbies of copies. So of course we can use those copies in order to educate people, but they have some lower cognitive value than, for example, the things themselves or ideas themselves, which are closer to the source of knowledge, so to say. So this is one Plato number one. But on the other hand, we can talk about Plato, who is talking also about artistic inspiration, divine inspiration. Like for example, one kind of mania is divine inspiration, which is also called enthusiasmos, which is inspired by divine reality, by divine spirit, and something like that. And this is exactly something which is also attributed to the artistic activity. When an artist has this divine inspiration, something is happening. So he gains some kind of knowledge there, which is then later capable of expressing by creating a piece of art, for example. And this one is very also interested in some other sources. Now, if we read classical poet Hesiodus, for example, in the beginning of Theogony, the poem devoted to the birth of gods, he's discussing the initial status in which he received divine knowledge, so that he was capable of writing this poem in the first place. And it is very interesting to read this beginning of this poem for us, because it somehow contains different information than we would expect. It appears that divine inspiration did not make Hesiodus to write this poem in more artistic, more beautiful way. It's not like a formal inspiration that you can help you to gain a sort of unique artistic style or something else. No, it's exactly the divine inspiration is exactly the source of information. So he's therefore he's saying that, well, I received this inspiration from divine reality, so that therefore I am capable of telling you the truth. So this is the only reason that I am, my knowledge is true. Namely, this the divine background is like legitimizes my own information that I provide in this particular point. And this is not only the case with Rasius, we also have many other examples, like for example in the quite obscure treatise which was called later by tradition Chaldean Oracles, which contains mostly Middle Platonic mystical theories, and it was composed probably in the second age Anno Domini AD. At the very beginning of the treatise we have the same ideas here, that namely the treatise is talking true content exactly because there was a certain occasion in which the writer himself was capable to access directly the spirit of Plato. Therefore Plato was the real author, and then we can somehow access this true knowledge and then put them into this particular piece of writing. So in case of Plato, we have a sort of very interesting architecture of knowledge. It consists on two levels. One is the very high spiritual, super high, it's higher than the normal intellectual activity, something which is divinely inspired. Then there is a gap, which is some sort of place devoted only for, let's say, the spiritual contemplation of ideas and scientific knowledge, which is true knowledge according to the epistemological definition. And then there is a lower part of knowledge, which is dealing with copy of copies. This is what is related to the art as technique, as a sort of technical production of items, so to say. And it's very interesting to see later attempts to bridge this to separated areas of knowledge, so to say. Now, for example, Aristotle later he's not talking so much about the spiritual inspiration anymore, although, well, there's a big question mark. We can read something in the last lines in his treatise on the anima about this active intellect, which later was interpreted as also some kind of divine inspiration, but rather like divine illumination for sort of active intellect. But it is already a big question which was discussed in length in the run of the history of philosophy. Well, Aristotle is more, somehow more inclined to discuss practical aspects of creation of art, and he, as you very well know, focuses on the idea of Mimesis imitation, and in fact, he uses this as the common source of all artistic activity. Although a description of Mimesis is also very interesting from that respect, that we usually are reading too quickly through these lines, and we're missing some important elements according to my understanding. So I would rather spend some time, a couple of minutes, discussing one particular element of Mimesis, which, to my understanding, also allows us to speak about the epistemology of art as somewhat different from this scientific logical epistemology as we expected. So Aristotle, in his Poetics, talks that the Mimesis is universal source of artistic activity because it is natural to human beings from early childhood. Of course, that is very well known, and it provides pleasure, especially for children. Children like to imitate everything. It's kind of games when you imitate, and you also learn something. So the source of pleasure and source of knowledge, just the classical definition of Mimesis. And he says, again, this is the fourth chapter of Poetics, that we can experience this type of pleasure by gaining knowledge when we observe some painted, for example, dead bodies, that they are in reality not beautiful, but when they are painted, we gain some knowledge. And then he as if passes to the idea that it is pleasant for us to know something that we didn't know before, and we are capable then, when we know this, we can discuss it among ourselves. So this is exactly the same knowledge, or similar knowledge to the one that is gained by philosophers, but he said that philosophers, they tend to speak always, so they're always discussing and always gain that knowledge, but in terms of perceiving art, it's more like temporal, so you gain this pleasure and knowledge and you are going somewhere else. As if it gives us the idea that art is also not so much perfect, but it's again a sort of a source of the same scientific or philosophical or practical knowledge that you can gain from other disciplines. Now, for example, if we return to Plato, Plato says that you know something when you can define it. So this is also a very important definition. So it means that if you create a definition, when you make a sort of logical assessment of an essence of the object, then you really know it. Well, it seems that Aristotle here also is corroborating to the same idea, that if you gain additional information about specific items, so you can include it in the definition. So you are prepared to make more specific, more correct, more just the definition of any specific element which is presented by art. Well, but this is only a little part of the true idea, which is related to mimesis and knowledge, I think. And the second part is more interesting for me. Now, when he's talking about tragedy, he's saying that one of the goals of tragedy or drama is to gain some knowledge when you observe a character performed in a theater, and there is a moment when you know, aha, so this is it, what it is, this particular character. So we can interpret this phrase, what it is, in quite different ways. One of those ways would be the same. We have occasion to acquire additional knowledge in comparison to what we knew before. So we can collect additional elements of knowledge, and we have probably better definition of what a particular character is. But there's also possibility to understand this, what it is, in a little bit different way. Namely, we are sure that ancient Greeks, for example, when they visited theater, they knew all those myths and stories in advance. So they, for example, Oedipus was a myth from the TV collection of stories which, well, everybody knew about Oedipus. But still there is some reason to go to theater and to see again and again perform the same story again and again. So you can turn this phrase by Aristotle and imagine a person sitting in a theater who is really, after seeing for the 10th or 20th time the same performance, he would say that, now I really understand what does it mean to be Oedipus. What does it mean to be a tragic hero? So this is type of knowledge which is different. This is not the same as inclusion of additional elements like the biography of Oedipus and to creating a sort of model of tragic hero that could be included in some, I don't know, book on tragedy like Aristotle's writing. No, it's rather something related to our personal understanding and to our personal experience. So I think that Aristotle was also open to this kind of interpretation, because this understanding of what it is in that particular place is really emphatic. It's not like to give us some idea which we didn't have before, and perform a sort of more exact definition of the type of character that is presented. So I would rather suggest that starting with Aristotle, we really have a sort of emerging occasion to discuss art as creating a sort of epistemology of its own. It is especially clear when we look at the context of the writings of Aristotle. So we have treatises devoted to analysis of being or nature, like I don't know, the parts of animal or the physics, or metaphysics, also the first nature. So it's something which is devoted to the analysis of reality as something which is objective to us, or something external, something that you find yourself in already. There is another category of treatises which is related to the particular aspects of life of human being, like ethics, for example. So this is something which you're not finding, but this is something that you have to do. in order to reach happiness, for example. Now, if you try to look closely to those two different types of work, so he's using two different methodologies there. So you have one methodology to deal with being, and the other methodology to deal with ethical problems. Now, the piece of which is devoted to the creativity, to the piece of art, to the question of art, is standing as if in the middle. And we are somehow expected, so okay, now Aristotle would rather use one of those two methodologies. So he is writing really about artistic creativity, artistic creation performed by some playwrights like Sophocles. Sometimes you can feel that he is as if discovering them and writing about them as if some kind of objective reality. But from the other side, he is also coming to the same question and is now suggesting how to write the good piece of drama in order so that it will be successful or have more artistic value. So you can feel that it combines elements of both methodologies in this type. But when he approaches the question of learning by visiting art and observing art, I have an idea that he is really coming close to the some sort of unique, specific type of epistemology here, which was later developed by hermeneutics, for example, some ages ahead. But still, it's very interesting to see that those elements are, to some extent, present already in Aristotle. Now, I could also proceed now later to Plotinus, for example, because he creates a sort of very interesting way to combine those Platonic detracted ways of knowledge by creating interlinking by sort of descendants of the form from the one to the nature. And in the case of Plotinus, even nature itself is a creator in that sense that it contemplates the source of being, so to say. So there's a sort of chain of transparent contemplated entities. It's also an interesting way to combine that, but that would be already a different discussion. So I would stop here and excuse myself for my poor English, and I hope that you can later ask some questions more personally, because I also have to excuse myself because I have to run to the Parliament. We will be opening the exhibition of our books. So sorry for that. So thank you very much for your attention.
Gal toks žodis, kaip jūs vertinate savo pranešimą svečio kontekste, atsiprašau už lietuvišką klausimą, nes atrodo, kad jūsų požiūris visiškai iš kitos pusės žvelgia meną, negu buvo ką tik papasakota, kad menas iš gamtos, o jūs labiau apie mimikriją, kad kartojimą, apie objektų naujų kūrimą.
Maybe I'll translate into English. So he's asking how this talk relates to the professor's talk, being so different in perspective. That you spoke about nature as a source of artistic perspective, whereas this had a lot to do with the ability to technically recreate something. And so the question is, how do they reconcile the two perspectives?
Aš manau, kad tie pranešimai nėra tokie skirtingi iš tikrųjų, nes so I think that our perspectives are not that so much different, in fact, because it is exactly that more analytical, technical approach to the truth in art that I was trying to oppose, maybe. What I was trying to say that it is possible to understand, even in Aristotle, that the knowledge in art is not something that you should reach by using analysis, for example. What is analysis? Something which you use force to open. You push some your own theoretical schemes. You try to superpose your theoretical models on some material, so to say. So. Or you try to see some kind of essential abstract relationship within the system. So that would be sort of making analysis and trying to reach truth by using analysis. Well, I think that in Aristotle we have an idea that this is not the only way you can gain knowledge in art. You could use something more similar to what the professor was talking about, the nature as self-evidence. In that when you experience art, something is happening, and you as if get in touch with something which you are not trying to analyze or to push in somewhat, but rather on the contrary, something which is immediately connected to you as a person and which enriches your experience in that sense. So I would rather see here a sort of direct connection here. But well, of course, you're right that the discussion should be developed further to explain this.
Yeah. 7th centuries introduced kanji, Chinese characters, but we are living only in the island without contact with continental people. We never have letters. So letters creates abstract concept, abstract idea, like Plato, like Aristotle. It's a word of the vocabularies, words of the words, for us. And so that's why we didn't accept that Chinese philosopher like Confucianism, because it's a fact, it's a reality. It's sufficient for us to read. And so, of course, it's after the introduction of Chinese character, we begin to think with letters. But, it's letters always is something, of course, it's important for the memory. But it's among the people, there's no, for example, there's no contract, because it's always with oral, promise, and it's sufficient. So concept of the language is very different. So there's why the Japanese people, there's no, not known for European people, because there is no script, or proofs, which explains the philosophical thinking, because we live only in the island, and it's not necessary to explain the phenomena. And that's why it's, of course, we are very curious phenomena of nature. So we study and research on the nature itself. But it's so always something concrete. So of course we understand after the universities changed, and we studied much European philosophy. Plato, Aristotle, so many Kant, of course Marx also. So Marxism, Japanese Marxism is diffused in China, and the Chinese study the Marxism in Japan. That's why, because Japanese very curious about European study, but anyway, the attitude is very different. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my question, my answer to So of course you're well aware that you need a model for that.
Mm.
So this is the idea of model, which is the criterion of truth. The model will be always closer to truth than copy. Now, you can remember Timaeus Plato is talking about some kind of demerge who is creating physical world by looking at some model. So, but of course, this is a divine production, but it will be still not perfect to that extent to which the model is. So you always, as if distancing yourself from the model when you recreate it in such a way. But there is another it's a notion of truth in this technical activity. When you now, for example, if a carpenter is performing, is creating something, so there is a different way in which the carpenter would learn his own activity, exactly by imitating some teacher. So this is a question of know-how. And in that case, model is somewhat a little bit different thing. It's something which is created as if on the way to this specific item. And in that case, it seems that you're not so much distancing yourself from that model, but you can even produce better example of the same model, even in comparison to that example of your teacher that he created some time ago. So it's really, I would rather say that there are different answers to that question about the meaning or the function of truth in the process of artistic creation. And again, in Plotinus that will be completely different because then we have a sort of combined idea, because model is everywhere, it's going from the highest level of reality to the lowest in terms of logos, which is descending, the divine light which is coming down. And you are capable of attaining this model to a certain proportion at each particular level of reality. So in that case, the technical performance would not contradict your this idealistic focus on this abstract model in that sense.